have Rachel Charlton Daley, who's an award-winning disability rights journalist, editor and activist who's going to come and speak to us for the next 20 minutes. Rachel's a prominent disability rights columnist for the Daily Mirror, who guest edited a series Disabled Britain, Doing It For Ourselves, and founding editor of The Unwritten, a publication for disabled people to share their authentic experiences. They've written for a wide range of publications and currently trying to get the press regulator to create much-needed guidelines around disability. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that's something we can get off the ground at the end of the conference today? So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Rachel. Croeso.
Hello, I'm going to sit down here because that thing terrifies me, to be honest with you. Hello, and thank you all for having me here today. And thank you, Emma. I've lost you, but thank you for that amazing introduction. It's really funny because obviously that's my life and my achievements. But when you hear them all read out, it probably takes you back. And if you were watching me, I nearly teared up just hearing all these things. It didn't sound like it was really me. But that's all right, because I'm going through the menopause, so I'm emotional and forgetful anyway, you know. Anyways, I'm going to repeat it all now and put it all in a bit context. I'm sorry, this might be a bit boring, but I'm going to do it again, because I'm a journalist. I like talking about myself, to be honest with you. If you don't know me, I'm Rachel Charlton Daley. I'm a freelance print journalist focusing on disability rights. I've written for some of the biggest print publications in the country, and I'm the founder of The Unwritten, a publication for disabled people to tell their own authentic stories. Last year, I was the guest editor of the Mirror's Disabled Britain series, and I currently write a weekly-ish, column, because sometimes it's twice weekly, depending on how mad I am at the Tories, and sometimes it's fortnightly, depending on how exhausted I am from raging at the Tories. And in it, I react to how politics, society, and the media treat disabled people. And trust me, I can't believe I get to do that for a tabloid either. So I want to start again, because I started this speech by apologising for repeating my achievements. And I think that's part of why I'm here today. As disabled people, we've been conditioned to apologise for who we are. A big one most disabled people apologise for is when we think that we've inconvenienced someone. Oh, sorry, would you mind moving? Sorry, I can't do this. When in actual fact, it's not us that are in the wrong. We've either been made to feel guilty. Oh, I'm sorry. This was the issue, but I needed. Where was I? It's not me that's in the wrong. We've been made to feel guilty. And I lost my place there, sorry, because I got distracted. When in actual fact, it's not us that's in the wrong. We've been made to feel guilty for not being well enough to attend something, or things that are being made inaccessible for us, such as when pavements are getting blocked by massive prams or those horrible scooters that are in every city now. And I could rant about that one all day. But I think it comes down, essentially, to us saying, I'm sorry for taking up space, and I'm sorry for existing, which we have been made to feel like we don't deserve as disabled people. And a big thing I'm guilty of saying sorry for is when I'm correcting somebody about the way they talk about me or my disabilities. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not suffering. Or, I'm sorry, but I'm really not brave. And more often than not, it's when they're being really ignorant. Like, I'm sorry, but ADHD isn't just a trend. Or something I find myself saying pretty much every day now. I'm really sorry, but I'm actually not a scrounger. I do have a job, and even if I did have a job, I wouldn't be a scrounger. It's like, why am I apologising for that, you know? And why do they think it's okay to say that in the first place? And there's lots of reasons for that. But I think the main one is that what it boils down to is that it's how non-disabled people were taught that it was okay to talk about us. And that comes from, in the main part, that the media has made it okay for them to talk about us in that way. And that boils down to the three ways that we're talked about, which Rianne focused on, but I'm going to talk about it more from my experience. So first of all, were the inspirational stories. You know, the late great activist Stella Young coined the term inspo porn to encompass when disabled people are held aloft for doing things that non-disabled people aren't celebrated for, such as education or exercising. I mean, not me. I probably would exercise if somebody cheered, to be honest with you. I'd probably be more likely to exercise. But we see it in the god-awful posters of disabled runners with, "What's your excuse?" plastered over the top. Or you think about the disabled kids hearing their mums talk to them for the first time. Or when we're called brave or superheroes for pushing through the pain. And of course, the big problem with inspo porn is that it puts the onus on us succeeding despite our disabilities or overcoming obstacles. And it means when we don't, we're seen as just not trying hard enough. Like, it's not that society is the problem. You just didn't try hard enough to do that, you know, because that person can do that. Why can't you? And the thing is, I don't do what I do despite my disabilities. Well, I do everything despite my disabilities apart from the dishes because I've got ADHD. That doesn't exist. I work with my body to overcome the obstacles that the ableist world has put in front of me, essentially. And here's a one that I quite like telling people. The well-known slogan, "Disability in a life is a bad attitude." Here's a surefire way to get them to stop using that. Remind them that it was popularised by Oscar Pistorius, and they'll stop. Anyway, moving on. On the other end of the scale, we have the trauma. This is when our most personal medical details are used for views and clicks, and this is something that I've been trying to stop the print media especially from doing. But when they essentially have to rely on their ad revenue and stuff, of course they're going to use the most clickbaity headlines. But it centres the irrelevant part of our story, because more often than not, my disability is the least relevant part of what I'm talking about. And they dedicate huge chunks to specifically what my disability is, how it affects me, how does it make you feel, how does it make your family feel. And what that does is that it makes non-disabled people think that they can talk, that they can ask these questions. You know, we've just seen that awful campaign from the government that was the Ask, Don't Assume campaign, that they reckon was going to help us by making everybody more caring and more wanting to talk to us. But really, when you have these intrusive questions asked at you all day, you just know that it's going to lead to even more. And what it also does with trauma porn is that it paints disabled people as burdens more than anything. You know, it paints us as burdens to our families and our partners, and it also paints them as saints for standing by us. So I wanted to tell the story of when I was 16, and the big thing that was in the media then was on TV. The character from EastEnders, Honey, discovered that she had a child, that she was going to be having a child who had Down syndrome. At the same time, I had just had a huge diagnosis of lupus, and I was discovering that I was very reliant on my family. I was very reliant on my parents, and I didn't know where in the next 10 years I would be without the help of my parents. But at the same time, there was this awful story that was being spread over everything, and the whole narrative was, poor Honey, she's got this awful thing happen to her kid's disabled, how will she cope? There was even a story that was justifying her abandoning her kid, you know, and it was things like that I don't remember the whole storyline, but I do remember how awful that made me feel as a newly disabled kid, because I was still a kid, I was only 16, and thinking about how that was going to play on for the rest of my life. And it's something that honestly I've carried with me for like easily the last 2 decades. Things like that. And finally, the narrative that we're all a bit too used to is that we're all faking it for attention. All those sweet, sweet disability benefits. Oh my God, I don't know about you guys, but I am rolling in the sweet, sweet disability benefits. I'm really not. Before anybody starts emailing us, I'm not. So yeah, obviously we're all really familiar with this, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But what I do think the big part of the disability narrative, the scrounger narrative comes from, is the fact that 77% of our print media is owned by right-wing people. So it's owned by people who support the Tories, give money to the Tories. And that's, of course, going to bleed into all of the other outlets because they set the blueprint. And instead of focusing on how many millions of people have died, hundreds of thousands of people have died of austerity, they're focusing on whether we deserve to live, you know? We're not really doing anything, are we? We're all just lazy buggers. So it's exhausting. It's an exhausting narrative. And, you know, it's always going to be putting the onus on the fact that we're the ones fiddling the system and not the fact that millionaires have unpaid taxes, millionaires and billionaires have unpaid taxes £42 billion a year, because, you know, we're not the ones who are all supporting the Tory party, and we're not the ones who are all in charge of the papers. So, of course, the real enemy here is the work-shy disabled people who dare to have iPhones, isn't it? That's the real enemy. And more recently, we've seen it in the disbelief that many people who are being diagnosed with neurodivergent conditions, such as ADHD, just are lying. You know, we must all be lying about it. Because, of course, it's not that women, especially, are overlooked because the stereotype was naughty boys. It's that we all just want to be famous on TikTok, which, you know, I would love to be famous on TikTok, but all I really post about is my dog. So, and it's not just in these big ways that media, sorry, I keep doing that. It's not just in these big ways that media ableism occurs in the press, in the print media. It's in the way journalists are too afraid to use the word disabled. And almost anything beyond it, such as differently abled, people with determination. I'm determined to stop you all from being ableist, if that helps. And describing, and then on the other end, describing us as wheelchair-bound or wheelchairs and all of that, you know. But all of the above is why I do what I do and why I'm really passionate about changing the narrative. Because most of the time, when our stories are told, they're done from an outside perspective, and they're written for non-disabled people to pick over and find outrage in before they move on to the next thing to be scandalised about. And I wanted to tell our stories not only by us, but for us as well. So I'm not going to talk about the lack of disabled journalists and how we get more disabled journalists into the industry, because Natasha's here to do that, and she's far more qualified than I am on that. But I will say that it's hard being one of the few more known disabled journalists who does get called on to everything, because I'm really aware that I've got an immense privilege, but I don't want to be an editor's excuse for somebody who is better placed. And that is starting to happen. I don't want to be, well, we've already got Rachel Charlton Daley, why do we need somebody else? I would die if I heard that. And while I do write a weekly column up with The Mirror now, which I'm immensely privileged to do, I've been freelance my whole career. And that's due to the fact that it's such an inaccessible industry to me, you know? And that's what is stopping our voices, because it's a massively inaccessible industry, and that keeps the narratives the same. Sorry, you're going to have a drink. So after decades of these relentless narratives... Oh, sorry, I did it. Sorry. Do you know, I thought I'm going to have a microphone and it means I'm going to be focused, but it's been doing this instead, haven't I? So, after decades of these relentless narratives and not seeing the full richness of disabled lives, it meant that when a deadly virus took over the world that affected us more than any other minority, it was easy for the government to use the media to reinforce that we were going to be the ones to inevitably die. We were labelled vulnerable and locked in our homes when the world opened up far too soon. And then while the media focused on how awful it had been for these poor non-disabled people to be inside for, what was it, 3 weeks? It wasn't 3 weeks, it was longer than that, but you know. They focused on how hard it was, when most of us are already in that position anyway. When we start talking about how hard it still was for us and how unsafe all of these measures were for us. We were being accused of taking away freedoms when all we wanted to do was not be left to die. And from a professional point of view, the first couple of years of the COVID pandemic, because I'm going to be calling it that, it's not pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, we're still in the pandemic. I saw my career thrive because it was the first time that everybody else was moving indoors as well. And it was hard, you know, because even though it was an issue that should have mostly been affecting disabled people, and it should have been where we were called on, I was constantly battling the editors to ensure that I, the disabled writer, was the one who was writing about these issues, and that the issues that were affecting disabled people were some of the most important things we could have been talking about. And it wasn't just that I was ensuring it was being covered by the right people, but that it was being covered at all. Because, you know, I was exhausted and absolutely worn down from being told by editors that they weren't going to be taking my pitch whilst the death tolls were rising and more things were coming up that were affecting disabled people, because they'd already covered something slightly to do with disabled people the week before. And the big breaking point for me was, and this was something that I was actually told, was that the news cycle had moved on. The news cycle had moved on from the fact that 6 in 10 deaths were disabled people, and that not all those dying were particularly susceptible. And that was when I just had to go, no, I'm done. And so I tried not to throw my laptop, and I was ranting to my best friend one day, and I was like, nobody is letting me do this, nobody is letting disabled people write this. And she went, so why don't you do this? Why don't you get people who are going to be writing the important stories and get them to do it for your publication? And I went, I can't do that. Can I start my own publication? And I sat with the can I for about a day and a half, and I was sat there going, should I be doing this? And then I was like, well, why shouldn't I be doing this? Why shouldn't I be the person to do this? So the Unwritten is the thing that I'm most proudest of in the world, because it was the one chance that I started giving people to have their unfiltered views actually out into the world. And I'm really sorry, I've realised I've been talking for a long time, and I'm going to skip through the thing I was going to talk about. So, of course, the Unwritten, off the back of that came Disabled Britain, and for the first time, a major tabloid ran a series of disabled stories created by disabled writers and editors, and that was where we needed it. You know, we needed to be focusing on our lives and the challenges we faced as disabled people, not just look at these disabled people having terrible lives. It was, these are the issues that are affecting us, and this is why. And it really shone a light on the societal problems. And because it was edited by a disabled editor, there wasn't the ableist language there wasn't the inspirational language, and we barely at all even mentioned people's conditions, because a lot of the time it just wasn't there, it just wasn't relevant. And of course there's the amazing things that are coming through now. So we've got a lot more disabled journalists coming through, and we've got amazing TV shows like A Kind of Spark, which has a majority disabled cast and is written by a disabled person. But you know, there's still the majority of the media, the press, the print media especially, is still got this hold over them from the Tory government, and it means that they are being spurred on to be as hateful as ever towards disabled people. You know, every week we have a story about how we're work shy or faking it, and in my opinion, part of the problem is that they've got nothing stopping them. They've not got the guidelines. And that's what I went to IPSO about in January. Had a meeting, and it was the most frustrating time of my life when I asked for guidelines on reporting disability. And the direct report was, well, nobody complains about ableist stories. Yeah, that's what I was told. I left that meeting to find, in that time, I was in that meeting for an hour, in that time 2 ableist stories had been posted online by the organisations represented by IPSO, calling ADHD not real. So, yeah, but nobody complains about them, and there's not a problem. So they said we don't get any complaints, so I gave them some. I gave them over 300. And they came back to me with oh, we weren't actually asking you to give us some complaints. We didn't think you'd actually give us some. And also, these can't be upheld because the editor's code only applies when you're discriminating individuals, not groups of people. We're trying to get that changed because they're going through a consultation. But if they did that and they made it groups of people, it would absolutely flatten the print media industry, because it means they wouldn't be able to be ableist, racist, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, all of the rest. You know, they'd be shut down. So that was in March when I got everybody to complain about that, and we've heard nothing back. In the meantime, it was rumoured that Sophie Morgan would be Strictly's first wheelchair-using contestant, and The Sun ran with the headline, Cha-Cha Chair, and they called Sophie a wheelchair. So I thought, all right, this is one person being discriminated against. You said if it's one person being discriminated against, that's against the rules. But no, because it only counts if it's the person happening to is being complained against. However, Sophie did complain, and she didn't hear back initially when all of us were told it doesn't matter. So since then, we've had various complaints and trying to get them on things like inaccuracy. The best thing I was told when we tried to complain about inaccuracy in one column, when somebody conflated two benefits together and said that everybody on benefits, including people on PIP and people on ESA and all of the rest, were all work-shy scroungers who didn't want to work, despite the fact that I've been claiming PIP for a long time and I work. So we went with inaccuracy, and they went, yes, but the thing is with that, this is a great one. The thing is with that, this is his opinion. So as long as he believes that it's true, it's fine. So essentially they're allowed to publish whatever they like as long as it's their opinion. So as you can imagine, working in an industry that actively endangers the lives of my community is exhausting. It is, and I've said exhausting about 5 times because I spend most of my life exhausted. And it makes me want to cry, and it's a lot to contend with the fact that I'm in an industry that does actively endanger my community. But there's a lot of light too. Whenever I see a writer that I gave their first published job to absolutely smashing it, when I see papers reaching out to disabled people and using the correct language, when I see someone or a room full of people like today living their loudest, most authentic selves, despite how much this government wants to crush us down, it makes me remember why I fight against this constant barrage, and I'm not gonna stop fighting. I'm very privileged to have a voice, and I'm gonna use it. So please, if you can, use your voice too. Disabled people deserve to live full, complex, messy, happy, even sad lives. And we deserve a media that represents that as well, not just actively endangers us. Thank you, everyone.